I snapped the needle clean in half on my first stab into the fabric. A perfect start. I was already on edge when I picked up that damn silver thread to begin the new client's design. Normally, I'm a whiz with a sewing machine, but something about this project had me feeling, let's say, jittery. Not off. I hate using that word. More like someone had jammed a live wire into my spine. I'm Sloan Alberti, freelance fashion designer, borderline insomniac, an occasional masochist for taking on weird commissions. Look, I've made costumes for fetish clubs, done bazaar, wedding gowns with black lace and goat skull motifs. I thought I was unshockable. Then came the email from a prospective client. I want you to create a one-of-a-kind wedding dress. White and silver. Symbolic embroidery. Lace elements from your personal collection. She introduced herself only as Sister Camille. That should have been my first clue. Who signs off with a title like that? But I was behind on rent, so I set up a meeting. She never showed. Instead, a deposit twice my usual rate landed in my bank account with an attached note. Trust my instructions. We'll be in touch. Look, money is my weakness. My thread snapped, my needle snapped, but I told myself to keep going. That night, I pulled the deposit's receipt up on my phone. The funds had come from an untraceable offshore account. Weird, I thought. But weirder still was the message at the bottom. We have been waiting for you. I brushed it off as a glitch in the system or something I was reading incorrectly. My downtown loft was a hurricane of half-finished dresses and bolts of fabric. I'd just reorganized the shelves to free up space for this new job. Yet I found a crate I didn't remember buying. No shipping label. Inside was the bolt of white satin Sister Camille had requested, emblazoned with a monogram I couldn't decipher, like overlapping letters, T and M maybe, or something else. Part of me wanted to toss it out, but I needed the job. I tried to set up a phone call with the client the next day. No response. Just more emails telling me to follow specific measurements. My measurements. I emailed back, "This must be for you, right?" The reply, "It's for the one who was chosen." Cryptic as hell, but the money was good. Keep going, Sloan, I told myself. It was around midnight when the actual madness began. The overhead lights flickered, and my phone started buzzing with a call from a blocked number. Static at first, and then a voice that sounded half digital, half human whispered, "Stitch by stitch, or you'll bleed by the inch." I laughed nervously. My knee-jerk reaction to fear is sarcasm. Am I supposed to be impressed by this dime store horror movie line? I said into the phone, heart hammering. But no one answered, just a slight clicking sound before the call ended. And that's when I realized the new fabric on my table had changed position. It was unraveling on its own, inch by inch. I was too wired to sleep, so I poured half a bottle of cheap red wine into a coffee mug and kept working. Stupid? Yes. But I needed something to calm my nerves. The instructions were precise. Thread of silver along the neckline. A single embroidered symbol at the chest. Strands of the designer's own hair woven into the inner lining. That last part made me choke on my wine. My hair? I reread the instructions. Locks of your hair, Ms. Alberti, precisely sewn into the lace. I nearly spit out. You want me to do what now? But rent is rent. I poured more wine. Maybe Sister Camille was an eccentric artist. I rationalized it. People put bizarre personal touches on dresses. Some brides tuck photos of dead relatives or even use the family quilt. This is just hair, right? My life's motto, rationalize until it doesn't sound insane. So I did. After a few hours of messing with the design, exhaustion slammed me. I collapsed on the couch. Must have passed out. Woke up at 4 a.m. to an overwhelming stench of bleach. Stumbling around in the dark, I realized the entire spool of silver thread had been dipped or coated in something pungent. My fingertips tingled. I flicked on my phone flashlight and found my spool sitting in the sink, dripping. The stainless steel basin was stained with dark splotches like old blood. A part of me screamed to call the cops. But what would I say? Hi, yes. Someone's messing with my thread. I could already hear the annoyance in the dispatcher's voice. Instead, I locked my loft and triple-checked every window. I stuffed the spool in a plastic bag. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe Sister Camille's playing a twisted practical joke. Or I was losing it. Could I have done that in my sleep? Another email arrived at dawn. Keep going. You cannot stop. The threads connect us all, from your mother's womb to your final vow. And that was the thing. My mother's womb, that stung. I was adopted, and I never hid it. But it's not something I mention to clients. Why would this stranger mention it? I wanted to push back, but I was shaking too hard to type. So I paced my studio. Then I saw the time, 6:16 a.m. My reflection in the mirror looked haggard, dark circles, hair pinned in a messy bun. The spool in the sink haunted me, so I decided to test it. I cut a piece of the silver thread, wore gloves, and tried to sew a small sample pattern. The thread glided, but the needle tore through the fabric in a strangely smooth way. Too smooth. That's when I noticed the cut on my fingertip, even though I wore gloves. A bright bead of blood blossomed on the fabric. Stitch by stitch, or you'll bleed by the inch. The voice from the call echoed in my ears. If this was a prank, it was the creepiest one I'd ever experienced. By mid-morning, I'd resolved to refund Sister Camille, block her emails, and run. I started drafting the cancellation message. I didn't care about losing the money. My sanity was worth more, right? Except, I glanced at my bank balance. The deposit remained, but an additional sum had appeared overnight. Another chunk of cash, enough to cover the rest of my rent for 6 months. Also attached was a note. Your father's last design remains unfinished. My father? The adoption agency told me my birth parents died in a car accident when I was a toddler. No photos, no real history. Just a sealed file. Had I missed something? My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure the neighbors could hear it. Could Sister Camille have ties to my biological family? I sat at my antique drafting table, rummaging for a business card from the private investigator I once half-considered calling. Instead, I found an envelope stuffed between my sketchbooks. It read, "Open when ready." The handwriting was mine, but the style looked off, like I'd been half asleep or in a trance when I wrote it. Inside were clippings from a local newspaper, dated the year of my birth. Local tailor and his wife vanish under suspicious circumstances. The couple's last name was Alberti. I never knew my birth parents' names. The article had a photo. A young man in an old-fashioned suit, a woman with haunted eyes. Tucked, behind the clipping was a single note. You'll finish what he started. My father had apparently been a tailor. I reeled back in my chair, nearly stumbling over a pile of half-sewn dresses. My chest felt tight. This was impossible. I didn't have these clippings. Didn't even know they existed. My first thought was a panic-laced wave of denial, then raw anger. Who'd broken in to plant that? Just as I tried to steady my breathing, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, a text. He never vanished. He's waiting for you in the threads. My lunch from her earlier churned in my gut. I typed back a single word. Who? The reply, your father. For the first time in my life, I wanted to tear everything I'd ever sewn to shreds. I wanted to bury myself under a mountain of fabric and pretend I never saw these messages. But a part of me, call it morbid curiosity, itched to know more. If there was a shot in hell I could learn who my birth parents really were, maybe it was worth pushing forward. even if it meant dealing with Sister Camille's cryptic requests. Determined to find answers, I dug into every hidden corner of my studio for documents. Meanwhile, I kept Sister Camille updated with shallow progress reports, terrified of pissing her off. She wrote back, "Good, the gown takes shape. Soon, we test the lace with your blood, so it's truly bonded." "We test it?" I muttered, reading the email out loud. She must be out of her mind, or part of some twisted cult. The mention of bonding by blood made my pulse spike. I locked every door again, though that hadn't worked before. I tried to focus on the actual dress design. The silhouette was classic, reminiscent of an old Victorian style my father, if that even was my father, might have produced. I was halfway through redrawing the pattern when I felt a tug at my scalp. My hair tie snapped, and a handful of strands yanked free. Pain shot across my scalp, and I spun around. No one was there. Of course no one was there. I was alone. But the handful of hair lay on the floor like an offering. My heart hammered in my throat. I forced myself to pick it up. My chest heaved. This is insane. This is insane. The internal chant didn't help. I ended up weaving the strands into the lace, tears burning my eyes, as though compelled by something beyond logic. Then a vivid memory I'd never had before crashed over me. A cramped sewing room, a man hunched over a small table muttering. I heard a child's laughter, my own. I saw the man turn around, his eyes hollow, as though he was stuck in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "Stitch the memory into the cloth," he whispered. Then everything went dark. I shook myself back to reality, half sobbing. My phone rang, again. I let it ring for a while before picking up. It was Sister Camille. "You're remembering," she said softly. I could almost see her smug, triumphant grin. "Your father did the same. The cloth called to him too." I swallowed. "Who the hell are you? What do you want from me?" Her voice lowered. "We want your gift. We want you to finish the vow your father began. He tried to break our arrangement. Now it falls to you." "That arrangement got him killed?" My voice cracked. "Perhaps. But he's here, in every stitch. You're so close. Don't make us remind you what happens when you try to run." The call ended with a wet hiss. I slammed the phone down, trembling. My father had tried to escape these people. Why me? I couldn't just keep sewing, but I couldn't abandon it either. That night, I crawled into bed, pulled the covers over my head, and tried not to cry like a child. Sleep came, but it brought nightmares. In the dream, the gown was complete. It stood on a dress form in my studio, shimmering under a single fluorescent bulb. Silver thread glistened around the bodice. Intricate lace patterns decorated the skirt. I approached, transfixed. My reflection in the nearby mirror was not me. It was some version of me with lifeless eyes and thinning hair. I looked drained, like a sacrifice on an altar. Then the gown's skirt moved on its own, shifting like it was breathing. The embroidered symbol on the chest pulsated, a heartbeat under the cloth. I reached out to tear the dress apart, but as soon as my fingers grazed the fabric, every needle in the studio flew at me like a swarm of angry hornets. I woke up screaming, sweating through my pajamas. The clock read 3:33 a.m. Classic. I threw on a sweatshirt and forced myself to check the studio. The half-finished gown was still on the mannequin, inert. But the spool of silver thread was strewn across the floor, weaving a random pattern around the legs of my sewing table. It looked like a spider's web, but the pattern was too deliberate, like archaic script. I tiptoed toward it, chest pounding. My phone was in hand, set to record. As I got closer, I noticed that the silver thread had a faint shimmer in the darkness. I nudged it with my foot, and the entire spool coiled like it was alive, pulling itself taut. I jumped back, letting out a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. Then, as if it sensed it had been discovered, it went limp. I recorded everything. "This is insane," I whispered, though my voice was shaky. "I'm documenting this in case I'm not imagining it, or if I end up in an institution tomorrow." Suddenly, my phone's flashlight caught something. A photograph pinned to the underside of my sewing table. A black and white photo of a man with eyes that looked exactly like mine. He had a spool of thread in one hand, and the same monogram from Sister Camille's crate was stitched into his sleeve. On the back, in a spidery scrawl, he tried to unbind himself. Don't repeat his mistake. I spent the next day calling every contact I had. Old mentors, costume designers, historians, anyone who might have recognized that monogram. Nobody had a clue. One woman from a historical textiles club mentioned that sometimes cults or secret societies used custom insignias. That didn't make me feel better. I also rummaged through my adoption papers, searching for the name Alberti. They were mostly redacted, but I saw the phrase parental disappearance repeated. No mention of a tailor or father's tailor shop. The more I read, the more I felt a suffocating dread, like the truth had been systematically hidden from me. With each unanswered question, the dread curdled into anger. I marched back to the studio. If Sister Camille wanted a wedding gown, I'd make it. But I was adding my own touches. I'd hide messages inside the embroidery. Maybe I could sabotage it. If it was some ritual garment, maybe I could break its power. For hours, I sewed manically, chanting curses under my breath. I used black thread to add tiny shapes under the white lace, invisible unless you turned the fabric inside out. My hands bled from repeated needle pricks. Whether it was fatigue or fear, I started hearing a voice in my head. "He's still here, Sloane. Keep going. Keep going." At one point, I smelled that bleach-like stink again. The spool of silver thread was wet, dripping a pinkish fluid onto the floor. I sniffed it, metallic, like blood mixed with something else. Gagging, I bunched it up in a rag. Enough was enough. I flung the spool out the window, letting it drop into the alley below. Then a furious banging rattled my front door. My heart nearly shot out of my mouth. I tiptoed over, peering through the peephole. No one. But pinned to the door was a note on bright, expensive stationery. "Finish the job. The spool is back inside." I whirled around. The spool was on my table again, pristine, not a drop of fluid on it. I staggered, nearly choking on my own breath. This was an inescapable madness. They, whoever they were, had me in a chokehold of terror. Stitch by stitch, or bleed by the inch. I slumped into my chair, feeling tears smear my cheeks. I had to keep sewing or risk a fate worse than losing my mind. On the 7th day of this torment, I finally finished the base structure of the gown. Next step, that damn embroidered symbol on the chest. It was an elaborate crest with swirling lines that formed an inverted heart shape. The instructions demanded I incorporate a droplet motif using my own blood. I stared at the needle in my hand, my left thumb already bandaged from countless pricks. My mouth went dry. Could I fake it? Use red ink? Maybe they wouldn't notice. But something told me this cult or society had eyes on me. They'd know. So I steeled myself. "Screw them," I muttered, pressing the needle into my fingertip. My body shook with panic, but I forced myself to drip fresh blood onto a small scrap of lace. Then I sewed it into the crest, my tears mixing with sweat. Each stitch felt like sewing my soul into the gown. A final binding. When it was done, I collapsed onto the floor, trying not to pass out. I was so lightheaded. My phone pinged, a message from Sister Camille. "Excellent. Bring it to the address below at midnight. Alone. Welcome home. The address was a place downtown, an old building near the abandoned garment district. I recognized it from the corner of memory, a boarded-up storefront with dusty windows. My father's tailor shop, perhaps. Midnight came too quickly. I loaded the gown into a garment bag, grabbed pepper spray, and took an Uber to the location. The driver eyed me suspiciously, but said nothing. I hopped out at the deserted street corner. The building loomed ahead, no lights on inside. The air felt colder than it should. My knees wobbled with each step. Inside, the place reeked of mildew and mothballs. Flashes of that dream returned. The single flickering bulb, the dress form standing in the center. Except now it was real. Sister Camille waited, half in the shadows, wearing a long black cloak. She was older than I'd imagined, with sharp features and black-veiled eyes. I tried to speak, but she silenced me with a gesture. "Put the gown on," she ordered. "You, Sloane Alberti, are the rightful heir to your father's vow." I refused at first. "I made this for you," I snapped, my voice quivering. "Wear it yourself." Sister Camille's lips curved into a thin smile. "It was always meant for you. Your father tried to break his vow, so we needed a new bloodline. Heir. I never told you were adopted. You were returned to our circle by unfortunate means. We let you grow up outside, hoping you'd develop the same gift your father had. And you did." She reached out and clutched my arm with a vice-like grip. "Now put on the dress, or you will never learn how he truly died." My entire body shook. But that burning curiosity to know the truth about my parents overshadowed my terror, if only for a moment. With trembling hands, I unzipped the garment bag. The gown gleamed, an immaculate testament to the torment I'd endured. She forced me behind a makeshift curtain to change. When I slipped the dress on, it felt heavier than it should, like each thread carried a burden. The lace pressed against my skin where I'd sewn in my hair, my blood, my entire identity. I stepped out, tears stinging my eyes. Now what? Behind me, figures emerged, 4 of them, all cloaked, faces hidden. In unison, they began chanting in a low drone. Sister Camille circled me, brandishing a pair of shears. My heart pounded against the gown's tight bodice. She raised the shears to the embroidered symbol and cut a small slit right over my heart. Felt the cold air on my skin. Then she pressed a piece of cloth inside that slit, a cloth stained with dark spots. "Your father's final piece," she murmured. "He died refusing to let us have it. Now you'll carry it for him." Rage tore through me. They murdered him. My father tried to break free, and they used me as a replacement. Not today. With every ounce of adrenaline surging through my veins, I grabbed the shears from her. My first slash missed her by inches, but it severed the spool of silver thread she held. She hissed, lunging to grab it back. The cloaked figures advanced, but I kicked one in the knee. The other grabbed for my arms. My mind screamed, "Fight!" The heavy gown threatened to trip me, but I twisted free, jabbing the shears at the next figure's shoulder. Blood spattered. They reeled back with a strangled cry. Somehow, I made it to the exit, half limping in the damn dress. Behind me, Sister Camille shrieked, "You can't run forever, Sloane. The vow follows you. You're bound to us by blood." I spilled onto the street, panting, dress torn, my feet scraped. A single flickering streetlight illuminated me like a pathetic bride in tatters. My Uber driver was long gone. No one was around. Sirens wailed in the distance. I stumbled until I found a late-night convenience store. Collapsing inside, I must have looked like a horror movie refugee. The clerk gaped. He asked if I needed an ambulance, but I just shook my head and sobbed. I need to get out of here. In the days that followed, I hid. I stayed in a friend's apartment 3 cities away. I told her everything. She didn't believe half of it. Who would? But she helped me get rid of the gown. We burned it in a rusted oil drum behind her place. The flames sparked white and green, reeking of chemicals. And as the last scraps turned to ash, I could almost hear faint screams. Or maybe it was just the wind. Final realization. Then the calls started again. From unknown numbers. No matter how many times I changed phones. The static was always there, whispering, "He's still with us, Sloan. The vow was sealed, despite your betrayal. We're coming." That's when I understood. This doesn't end with burning a dress. If my father's vow truly bound me to these maniacs, I might have unleashed something worse. I check the windows every night, keep a weapon under my pillow, and still, I hear the spool rolling across the floor. See silver threads glinting in corners of my vision. I used to joke that I lived for my work. Now I realize my work might be what kills me.